Thank you, Susie.
I'm trying. Good evening and welcome to the meeting of South Oxford District Council, the Vale of Whitehorse District Council Joint Audit and Governance Committee on the 15th of October. I'm Councillor Moki Khan and I will be chairing this meeting. This meeting is being held at our office in Abbey House in Abingdon. Voting members are here in person as required, but officers and public speakers are able to join remotely via the Microsoft Teams. The meeting is being streamed live and recorded on the Council YouTube channel for public viewing. I've just got a few housekeeping announcements to make before we start the meeting. The evacuation procedure. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate the building by the nearest exit, which is in the corridor immediately to the right of this meeting room, and stand at the assembly point 9 in the outside area beyond the fire exit. On arriving at this meeting, you should have read the emergency evacuation procedure and signed the fire register. Please inform Democratic Services Officer if you have not. For those joining remotely, when you are not speaking, please ensure your microphone is muted and your camera is off. Please can everyone ensure that their mobile phone and mobile devices switch to silent during the meeting. And as we are a modern council, both officers and members will be using their electronic devices throughout the meeting. If councillors wish to speak or participate in the debate, please raise your hand, and I will come to you when it's your turn. Some motions or recommendations will be council specific, and only councillors from that particular council can vote. When it is that instance, I will let you know. So let's start the first part of the meeting, which is apologies for absence. Do we have any, Becky?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies.
Okay, we have a full house. Next item on the agenda is item 3, which is minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 26th of September. And we've got the minutes there, which are pages 5 to 7. And I just want to thank Councillor Forder for taking chair of that meeting. So thank you very much for that.
8 minutes, Councillor Khan.
So are there any questions on those minutes? I see none. Are you happy for me to sign them as a true record?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll have to propose it first. Proposer. Thank you, Councillor Skinner. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Morgan. All in favour? Thank you. I will sign that at the end of the meeting. Number 4, declaration of interest. To receive any declarations of disposable pecuniary interest and any conflicts of interest in respect to any items on the agenda. Is there any conflicts of interest? I see none, so thank you. Just in regards to item number 5, just in terms of urgent business, I do not have any urgent business to communicate, but I will just say, just as we said earlier, if there are any confidential questions that we have on one of the agenda items, which is number 7, then please, we will have to go into confidential session. So try not to avoid that. So just ask generic questions, but if we do need to go to confidential session, I will. Number 6, which is public participation.
Thank you, Chair. No public registration.
Okay. One day. Item number 7, which is the Treasury Management ESG Investment Review. That's on pages number 8 to 11. And we're going to receive a report from the Head of Finance and also from Dan as well.
Thank you. So environmental, social, governance matters and how they interplay with Treasury management activity have generated much discussion in these councils and more widely councils in recent years. In February 2024, I, as Section 151 officer, found that we would get Link Treasury Services to do a review ESG matters in the context of the council's treasury management activities. Link have undertaken their reviews and they are attached as confidential appendices, and Dan Wilson from Link, the report's author, has provided a presentation on the reports earlier this evening for all councillors. The reviews make a number of recommendations for officers to consider in drafting future treasury management strategies. And these are shown in paragraph 7 of the report. Committee is invited to consider the linked reports and recommendations and make recommendations to officers for consideration in the preparation of the Council's treasury management strategies for 2025-26. Dan is here to answer any questions alongside me. As we said earlier on, please do note that any questions of detail in the report will not be able to be taken in public session. We'd have to move into confidential session to deal with those.
Thank you. Dan, do you want to make any comments before we proceed?
Not really, apart from just to repeat what I said earlier in terms of our findings show that there were no red flags in terms of the investments held by the council, by the councils, apologies, at the end of March. That there are some steps that can be taken, but care needs to be taken with steps to avoid any unintended consequences.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, do you have any comments or questions? Councillor Rawlings.
I'm conscious that we obviously got a new government and they're talking about changes in some other realms, like, for example, pension funds and what they can invest in, infrastructure, and so some changes to what was previously the case. I take the point that you advised that we're fully compliant at the moment, but that's compliant, I guess, with the outgoing government's view of the world, which, in my view, ESG wasn't top of their priorities, perhaps is a gentle way of putting it. Are you aware of changes that might be coming down the line that have been flagged?
Not with regards to ESG and local authority investing. That we have seen. It doesn't mean that they won't materialize, whether that's over the next 6 months, over the next 2 to 3 years, that investment guidance, there's no reason why investment guidance won't come under review. I think it's potentially, I suppose it might be to do with opportunities, as you highlighted, in terms of a focus more on infrastructure. Will that present councils with potential longer term investment opportunities that the two councils may want to consider as part of their strategy going forward? But again, it's all about understanding whether these things are appropriate. Some of them may be headline grabbing, exciting projects, but they've got to be financially viable. They've got to make sense. They've got to be aligned with what you're trying to achieve with your treasury management investments.
Yeah, we're less long term than pensions, certainly, aren't we?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I see none. I think you've probably done the briefing very well, Dan. So everyone's. Oh, Councillor Roberts.
There was one question in the report, which is for SODC only, about whether they wish to continue with, or whether they feel the unit trust investment remains appropriate. I thought that since it's on the agenda, that should be discussed, but probably not by the Vale councillors. She says, shutting up rapidly.
What do you think, South councillors? Any comments?
My view is we should look at a different approach. If we could, now it's on a FTSE 250 or whatever, if that's the approach, it might be, I guess that there are or will be vehicles out there that will look at a similar thing, but with certain companies excluded because they don't meet an ESG threshold. So you've still got a diverse portfolio, you've still got a tracker mechanism, but you've just chosen to keep out of certain arenas. Companies which you might judge could at some point in the future have a sharp fall in capital value because their ESG rating starts to impact on their business model or their acceptability. So it seems to me that is something we should look at. And I'm not suggesting anything rash, and I'm certainly not suggesting we pull a lever one day and we swing the whole lot across, but we might make a sensible transition, so that we're not necessarily moving a lump at the wrong time. You know, we're at least spreading it and taking a measured view.
Councillor Dragonetti?
I suppose, Dan, that there are American or funds which would comply with ESG. Because we're wholly invested in the UK in this fund, and over the last 10 years there's been a lot of growth in US equities, which continues, sort of currently. I know it may all end in tears, but and all investments can't they? But if there were American ESG compliant funds, presumably we could put out a proportion of our resources.
Yeah, you could do. Yeah, Councillor, correct. You could do. That most funds of a reasonable size, what they would have is they would have a sterling share class. So therefore, you're not taking any currency risk. That gets hedged out at the point of investment and the point of divestment. So yeah, and it is about structural issues that you're looking at. If you look at the UK stock market, it is dominated by 2 or 3 large sectors, and so therefore its performance can be quite affected by what's happening with those particular sectors. It has a very low exposure to tech and technology. If you look at what's happened to US equity markets over the last year, 18 months, the worry is that it's not necessarily broad-based, that a lot of the performance is being driven by 7 or 8 companies. And so the danger is that you buy into something which is, say, a broad-based US equity fund, and you get some of the benefit, but you don't necessarily get all of it. And so therefore it's about careful consideration, and it's not about moving away from the UK. It's about trying to understand what a fund is trying to achieve, what it's investing in, what its financial goals are, what other metrics it's taking into account in terms of acquiescing to investor requirements, and finding something which is appropriate for your particular needs. I think that jumping ship to let's go to the US market because the US market has been the best performing one over, that's not what you're suggesting at all. It's just saying that there is a wide world out there, and actually while we may be based where we are, we can access a wider opportunity set than something which is solely focused on UK PLC.
Yeah, I think spreading your risk and spreading your chance of reward is the message I would like to, and I'm sure you would share, because it's the
Just to make the point that the UK FTSE is obviously quite international in its income streams that sit underneath the companies, so it's not all actually invested in the UK. There's all the differences that you discussed, but just to make the point, it's not just solely in the UK economy, it's actually pretty global.
BAT gets all its shares, all its income from overseas, for one example, doesn't it?
Okay, any other comments or questions?
Yeah,
Yes,
sorry, Mike Boone, independent person. I'm confess to being late to this. I wasn't, didn't know your briefing was happening, and I've only just seen the papers as well. So if I've got the wrong end of the stick, just bear with me. The sort of existing hierarchy appears to be security, liquidity, and yield. Where does ESG fit in that hierarchy? At a different position, or bundled up amongst all of those?
It sits to the side, councillor, and that's that there are linkages between security between liquidity and between yield. So you could, one of the ideas behind environmental, social and governance, scores and risk metrics is to say that outside of the broad normal financial considerations you put into place, actually the way that this company is faced with E, S and G risks and the way that it's managing those could be detrimental to its long-term enterprise value. And so therefore, if you're looking at it from a long-term perspective, so for example, in terms of an equity market position that you might be holding, actually it could become quite relevant in terms of security, because the value of a company may fall over time because of its poor performance with regards to ESG, which then means that lots of investors start to divest their position because they just don't think it's a good company to be invested in. But it depends on the nature of the investment. So when you're looking at your day-to-day treasury investments, so the money you're placing with financial institutions or with other local authorities, it's a far more subtle nuance that it may have on your investment decisions, because you are very constrained in terms of the sorts of organizations that you can deal with. So for example, you have to deal with organizations who are active in sterling money markets. Not all banks, building societies, etc., are active in wholesale sterling money markets. That they've got to be well rated, they've got to have strong credit ratings, they've got to be viable entities. And so therefore your universe of potential options could be shrunk quite significantly, so that when you then start to apply E, S and G metrics, it actually has very little impact at all, and so therefore very little impact in terms of security, liquidity and yield. So it's different, unfortunately it's different things for different parts of your portfolio, which is why it's not just an easy let's just put a line across here and we can just do this and this and everything is fine. That you've got to look at all the potential ramifications of applying any policy, whether it's continuing with the current policies that the two councils have in place, or if you're looking to evolve those policies, looking at it from all the different aspects to make sure that you are not having a potential detrimental impact in terms of security, most importantly.
Okay, thank you for that. It does make it sound all the more challenging, though, in terms of actually the implementation of it, and when it comes to choosing where to place investments and so on. Sounds like you've got to have an awful lot of views coming in at it all the time, constantly.
I think so, but I think what's really important, what we try to get across in the two reports, is you're not doing, neither council is doing a bad job in terms of what it's doing on its investments, that it's not making rash decisions, that it's not dealing with organizations that may be in conflict with norms or moral norms, etc. Yes, there may be particular views from people who say, well, actually I don't particularly like this particular bank for these reasons or that particular bank for those reasons. But again, that's where you have to be very careful in terms of, if you start putting in lots of red lines, you suddenly find that rather than having a counterparty list of 50 different banks you can deal with, you've got 3. And then you move into the realms of diversification issues, which then can impact in terms of security. So it is an easy task in a way, but it's one that you have to approach very carefully to make sure that you don't trip yourself up.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Roberts and then Councillor Rawlings.
Well, I'd like to ask our 151 officer, given all the information that you've had in these 2 reports, how it's affected the way that you might select the various companies and banks and things in terms of going forward from this point.
I think that's probably spelled out really in paragraph 7 of the covering report. I mean, obviously Dan's reports make a number of recommendations which I've highlighted, and I mean, noting that they're all to consider. I'm happy that we consider all of the recommendations in there. I think and I think Dan's just alluded to it in his answer to Mike's question, it on one level it's really simple, on another level it's really hard. I think the challenge for me, in terms of my remit, as governed by codes of practice and legislation and regulation, is that security, liquidity, and yield in that order. And I think, in many ways, we describe ESG as an overlay. And I think I've said to this committee before, in an ideal world, what I'd like to be able to do is if on any given day I'm presented with two identical investment opportunities, we can lend 5 million at 3% for a year to counterparty A and counterparty B. In an ideal world, I then get my ESG score. They're both. We can obviously lend the money. They're both highly rated. They've got the same ratings. That's security covered. We can lend the money. That's liquidity covered. Yield's the same. That's yield covered. How am I going to differentiate between them? In an ideal world, I'd turn to my ESG scoring, and that would be the way I would differentiate between them. And that's where I'd like to get to. We're not there yet in terms of, I suppose, at that level. But I think some of the things in here. If I look at the second recommendation, which is to use one of the rating agencies and exclude institutions that don't get a certain score. Well, I actually feel that although that's almost ESG badged, it's almost governance badged anyway.
Exactly.
So I'm more than happy that we can, when we were going through the reports with Dan, myself and Anna, we looked at that recommendation and thought, well, that's just common sense anyway. Why wouldn't you do that? So, I'm assured that, if I think about what is governing Treasury management activity, which is regulation and compliance, the reports are reassuring that, we're already in a good place. There are things we can do to be better, and that, the recommendations I'm more than happy that we take on to consider that. But it's whenever I think of this report, I use the word minefield. That's what this area feels like to me, because you could decide that we'll do something good over here for a good reason, and the next thing you know, it's had an inverse opposite reaction over here that's not good. And I think it's a very challenging area, and I think it's very I know what rules govern me in doing the job, and but sometimes I think it can be quite difficult to explain those rules and justify them in the context of bigger picture matters that this involves.
Thank you. Councillor Rawlings, then Councillor Porter.
I'll make some suggestions. I think that for the deposits, money market funds, stuff that's less than a year, I honestly don't see what there is to be gained by factoring in a lot of ESG. It's fast moving stuff. It's stuff where we just need to look after our funds and do the right financial things, which we are doing. And in that arena, personally, given the complexity that's been alluded to, and we're on a journey here, so let's not go in the deep end straight off. I would say I'm not sure where the benefit is in that sector, but longer than that, if it's a year plus, then by all means, let's start to factor in some of bullet point 2, where we're talking about particularly governance, but where we're looking at red flags that or at least amber flags that might be coming up on the ESG, and we might want to factor those into our decisions alongside the preeminence of the SLI principles. I can't see there's anything to do on the loan issue. I can't see that there's a lot to do with the CCLA property fund, but I do come back to the unit trust equity stuff and think, yeah, that's an area where we properly could have a look, and that's a considered area. We can make a considered change there. It's not getting in our hair for proper day-to-day treasury activities, which just need to function and be efficient. And for me, that's what we should do.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Porter.
I just really want to make a comment in support, I think, of what Simon Hewings was just saying. Probably makes a change, but and I think it really is important to continue to focus on the 3 criteria which we know, because as Simon said, I think it is a minefield. And as I was listening to ESG, which of course we all support in principle, I can see how it can be very, very problematic in practice. And if you think back to the example of Thurrock, for example, which made lots of investments in things which seem very appropriate, very exciting from an environmental point of view. I think there were wind farms and things like that. And look where it got then, you know. So I think, however important it is, it does need to be considered very much in light of the three main criteria, which you know is throughout this report and was in Simon's statement.
I was just saying that with Thurrock, if you invest with a crook, that's what you get. It's not so about ESG, it's actually looking at who you're dealing with.
But true as well.
Yes.
I think that's for personal opinion that on that matter. Who we think is,
Still with fact.
no, it's personal opinion on that one.
So,
Mike,
yeah, just finally, because I realise we're dwelling on this a bit, but it does sound like a potential minefield, the whole thing. What you were saying, Simon, about, you know, comparing option A and option B, and then you were saying bring in ESG at the end, does actually sound like making it the fourth in the hierarchy, which does seem to make sense, because otherwise I can imagine you're just going out searching everywhere around the world to try and find weaknesses, and it's almost doing it negatively, saying, is there any reason why we shouldn't do this from an ESG point of view? I don't mean doing it lightly, but still, you know, just is there any reason not to? Otherwise, you can have a new department doing it.
thank you, Mike. Councillor Warren.
Yeah, I think our first responsibility as a council is to provide services to our residents. So we can't do anything that puts that at risk. And there are lots of examples of councils who've got those investments wrong. I think Councillor Rawlings' suggestion of looking at the unit trust and maybe a couple of baby steps on that, sort of maybe not chucking the whole baby out of the bath altogether, but a couple of sort of small steps, look at what that is, which doesn't rule out then moving more of it at a later date. That seems an eminently sensible one to me.
Thank you. Is there any other comments or questions before I go on to the recommendation and seeing if there's any proposals? Okay, I see none. Let me just read out the recommendation, and then on this particular point, it will be council specific in terms of the recommendation and the voting. Recommendation is Joint Audit and Governance Committee is recommended to consider the environmental, social and governance ESG investment review reports by Link Treasury Services and make recommendations to the Head of Finance for consideration in the preparation of the Council's Treasury Management Strategies for 25-26. So I'm going to start off with, obviously you've got the recommendations. I'm going to start off with Vale for you to have a discussion in terms of whether you want this noted or you approve the recommendations, or if you've got anything else for our Head of Finance to consider. So just for Vale councillors, is there anything else you want to recommend or suggest or comment?
I'm not sure whether we note the paper or approve the paper. It seems to me to be manifestly.
Yeah, this what you want. Are you going to just note the report, or are you going to make any recommendations?
So yeah, I'd probably propose that we note the paper and support the recommendations that are set out in paragraph 7. Obviously, the first 3 that apply to Vale, because the bottom one doesn't.
That sounds about right to me.
So is that your proposal?
Yeah, that's my proposal.
Is there a second? Okay, councillor Porter. Any discussion or debate on that? I see none. So those in favour to go with that go with that. So, councillor Skinner.
All I was going to say was it seems to me that we should put something in about leaving the officers to make a judgment of when they feel it be appropriate to put more weight on it. I mean, that's all, but that's all right.
Yeah.
Is that something you want to add?
I think probably because the way that the recommendations worded about considering how to improve it and consider it, I think it probably covers it how it's worded actually gives that flexibility.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think anything that makes it kind of, what's the word, sort of simpler and to sort of give permission to the officers to explore that, then I think that's a good thing. So if you're happy, Councillor Skinner, I'd probably just stick with the wording as on the paragraph 7.
So just to clarify, the recommendation is to accept the 3 recommendations as highlighted in item number 7.
Yeah.
Correct.
paragraph 7, yeah.
Paragraph 7. So those in favour, please show your hands. That's unanimous. Thank you. That's approved. Thank you for that. Now just for South councillors, we've actually got 4 points to consider. So do we have any proposal or comment?
Which page of the report is this on?
Page 9.
Right, okay, sorry.
It's on paragraph 7.
Yeah, thanks for page 68.
Yes, and the first item on.
Well, Councillor Dragonetti finds page number 9. Is it Councillor Rawlings?
Yeah, my suggestion was we do less and we focus more on the existing SLI approach for deposits and investments of less than a year. So when it's just straight money transaction, that's what we do. When it's a year plus, we start to factor in bullet point 2, where we do take some ESG and some governance issues into account and take that into play. I definitely think that as we get to the 4th point, we should look at an alternate approach. And I've suggested that some of those verbally, but I think it's right for Simon to have a look at those and to assess what might be a good way forward. But I think we should try and look to a way forward, and we might look towards one of the advisors that were referenced as the sort of leading ones to help us on that journey without sort of incurring unreasonable costs.
So just to clarify, Councillor Rawlings, what are you proposing?
Exactly what I just said.
But in a very succinct manner. Are you saying, and this is my understanding, that we approve and accept the 3 points recommendations, we approve those, but you're saying if there's any other further investment or decision making, that it goes to the offices for them to review and assess. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm saying for the deposits less than a year, go on us now, essentially. If it's longer than a year, then start to factor in that bullet point 2. And as we go to longer term stuff, and particularly for the equity stuff, that we have another look. And I'm saying, it's not in these bullet points, but I'm saying I don't think we should worry about the loan that we have out to Soha, and I don't think we should be worrying about the CCLA property, because I don't think that at this stage, taking one step at a time, that's something we should plough into.
Yes.
That's okay.
Simon, and then Councillor Morgan.
So just to confirm, the SOPAR loan wasn't a Treasury investment.
I know it's not strictly a Treasury.
So it's outside the scope of this report anyway. I mean, obviously there are no recommendations about the CCLA investments for reasons detailed in the link report.
Yeah.
Councillor Morgan.
So I'm not clear from Councillor Rawlings about whether you.
Sorry.
I'm not clear from Lee whether you actually want to change anything in the 3 bullet points that's there now at the moment. The comment was about how it's interpreted.
I'm slightly changing bullet point 1 in as much as it's saying give greater consideration to ESG factors in any money market process. And that seems to me would affect those things of a shorter date that I'm not sure would be our first focus.
I think the key word in there probably is consider.
Okay, that's fine. Withdraw.
We don't have to accept it, just to consider it and think about it.
And I think my suggestion on the 4th bullet point is that we refer to part of that fund and not all of it, just to make it clear
Make a step.
that we would actually want to make some steps towards it.
I agree.
But actually we would want to make part of it. So however that wants to word it.
Yeah.
So it's probably should be followed for all or part of that investment.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So that would be my suggestion, just to tweak that slightly.
So that's I would
Okay,
change
Councillor Dragonetti.
to say instead of follow, just be considered.
Okay. So who is giving me a proposal? Okay, Councillor Morgan, can you just repeat it so everyone can take a note of it and we're all clear?
So we're proposing accepting the 1st, 2nd and 3rd bullet point.
Yes.
And we're considering on the 4th bullet point that we consider whether the council's unit trust investment remains appropriate for all of the sum, or whether an alternative investment approach should be followed. or you could put for part of the sum.
Because we should be considered or part of the sum.
Yeah.
Okay,
Is that?
that is clearer than before. But it's still got the same point.
Yeah.
Who would like to second that proposal? Thank you, councillor Rawlings. Any debate on that? I see none. Okay, so those in favour of the revised and tweaked recommendation, please raise hands. That's unanimous. Thank you. You got made a note of that. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, councillors, for that. We got there. So we're now on to item 8, which is the annual complaints report, which is on page 12 to 68. We've got Councillor Sam Casey, and do we have Mark online as well?
You do, Chair, yes, and also Sally Truman as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you like to
And
introduce?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Councillor Edwards from the Vale is going to try and join as soon as she can, but she's been held up with other things. She's going to try. Committee, yes, we bring this report to you annually, as you probably remember, some of you, because you're, as the GAGC is the body that provides oversight to complaints handling, and councillors who have seen previous reports will note that this one is significantly longer than normal, and this is because both the councils are now registered as social landlords. This means that the tenant landlord complaints fall under the jurisdiction of the Housing Ombudsman, and because both the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman and the Housing Ombudsman have published new codes of practice on complaints handling since the last report. So you've got a whole bunch of appendices related to that. And this means that the councils needed to make a number of changes to the complaints handling to comply with these new codes. And you'll see the key changes are summarised in the body of the report and highlighted in yellow in the revised complaints policy at Appendix 4. So I'll just summarise the major changes. Clearer definitions of what is a complaint and what can be dealt with as a simple service request. So defining those two and separating them out. Changes to timescales for responding to a complaint. You'll see in that some bits shorter, some bits longer. So that's just, it's not shorter or longer, there's a mixture. There is increased reporting requirements on councils, and there's a specific requirement to learn from complaints and make service improvements as a consequence of issues being raised. And the impact of these changes mean that we're likely to see a rise in the number of formal complaints in the current year, which will feed into next year's report. Part of the Housing Ombudsman's code requires councils to complete a self-assessment of the complaint handling processes against the code and report it to this committee. And there's a draft self-assessment in Appendix 3, which we'll look at. Appendix 2 contains, we're going backwards with the appendices here. Appendix 2 contains the annual letters from the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman that we get on complaints relating to the council services that they've received. And turning to our performance on complaint handling last year, that's from Appendix 1. I'm really pleased to report that in general, the general trend is a reduction in the number of formal complaints against both councils, actually, with, as in previous years, the largest number relating to planning and council tax benefit, the council tax and benefit service. But I would just like to highlight that because of the complexity of those services and the volumes of customers, I think these are still low numbers, and that's to be expected to a certain extent because of complexity. The average number of days taken to respond to stage 1 complaints for South Oxfordshire was 13, and at stage 2 was 16, and for Vale it was 14 days at each stage. Some responses were outside the timescales set out in the existing complaints policy and had to have deadlines extended. And again, these tend to be the more complex services. But there's obviously some room for improvement there. For South Oxfordshire, 65% of stage 1 responses and 85% of stage 2 were not upheld. And at Vale, this was 61% and 86% respectively. So I'm pleased to report that relatively low numbers of complaints were made to the Ombudsman. And of these, all were closed after initial investigation with no findings against either of the councils. And finally, you'll see that officers have included some compliments in this year's report, as requested from this committee last year. We've now launched a form on our website for customers and residents to provide comments and compliments to this to be a standard part of the report in the future. Thank you, committee, and be happy to take any questions or comments whenever Lucy's come on.
Yeah, thank you for that. Before I go to the committee, Mark, is there anything you want to add, or Sally?
No, nothing to add. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Morgan and then Councillor Skinner.
Yeah, there's obviously a recognition that with the new responsibilities there'll be an increase. Do we know what this year's number would be, so we've got an idea whether it's getting better or worse next year, or are we starting from a standing start for next year?
Well, like I said, we expect it to be more because there's a stage of complaints been taken out and it comes directly to the council, but I will refer to Sally or Mark on those particular tracking the numbers for this year so far.
Shall I go, Mark?
Go for it, Sally. Thank you.
Okay, so your report has got the numbers from last year. We think we're looking at similar numbers this year, but we don't know. Obviously, we're only partway through the year yet. What we don't know is the number of informal type complaints that contractors might have dealt with across all of our services. So that's a bit of a gap in our knowledge at the moment. We need to do some work with teams to understand that in order to understand how many extra formal complaints might come our way. Because obviously there were complaints which have been dealt with as informal complaints by our contractors before they come into our formal complaint system. So that's maybe the little bit that we don't know. So the answer is partially, I'm afraid. We may, as the year comes to its conclusion, we may have better information on that.
So the answer is this year really is the benchmark, and we use this year as the benchmark and move
This
forward.
year is the benchmark year for going forward. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Skinner and then Councillor Rawlings.
Simply to ask, in spite of all the changes there may be, that we have historical information included. I mean, reading the Ombudsman's letter, I thought, the reason they haven't put it in is that the Ombudsman is going to give me all that. But of course, I go there and if I know what he's going to give me is this year and then look at the year before. And then I like charts that show trends. Of course, there will always be reasons why things aren't quite comparable, but it's a jolly good idea to compare them anyway, my opinion.
So the charts in Appendix 1 have some comparisons across the years and include the Ombudsman.
Can you tell me what page that's on?
Page 18 of this Appendix 1.
For South it's 18, yeah.
Yeah, for South it's 18, and then further down it goes on to there. Yeah, so there it is on page 21.
How is that? Maybe it's maybe I'm just being okay. So for
Is that helpful?
Yes, but okay. I would like to see it by department. I mean, that's not really very. That doesn't help me.
And then if you go below service area complaints by stage, is that what you're?
Well, that's only 1 year, isn't it?
That's only 1 year, yeah.
Yes.
23, 24.
I mean, I don't like stuff over aggregated. Number of complaints. You know, I'm more interested in the departments. And if, as you say, the housing, now that we're a whatever it was, landlord, perhaps do they automatically just is this housing and environment, is that entirely new, or are the landlord things going to be a part of that? Because I would suggest if they're going to be part of it, it's probably worth splitting that and making that a separate category.
I believe that will be because they now come under different ombudsmen. So is that correct, Sally and Mark?
Yeah, we haven't had any so far, but when we do have, we'll report them separately to you.
Yeah, we need to disaggregate what we deal as corporate complaints, which go to the local government ombudsman, and what will go to the housing ombudsman as housing complaints, which are tenant landlord relationships. When we report next year, if we've had any complaints through the latter, we will report those separately as a separate chart. I take councillor's point that having historical information for each of the departments is possible, and we can certainly provide that to you offline. We'll send it to members of the committee after we've finished. We do have it in the previous year's report, but we didn't want to make the report even longer than it actually is. But we can show you the comparisons of how different departments have performed, if you like, or certainly the volume of complaints they've received.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Councillor Rawlings.
Yeah, mine was just quickly that observation actually of page 18 in that chart showing really good trend. That's the headline picture on all of those stages. And I just had a question really. Just wondering, does the CRM system that we've got coming along have any role and impact in this area?
Sally.
Me?
Sally, do you want to take?
Okay. Yes, it does. In the CRM system that we've purchased, that we're using at the moment, actually has a dedicated complaints module, and we have we've procured that module, and we're working with the supplier at the moment to set that up so that we can begin to use it in place of the existing in-house built database, which is a bit limited in its recording and its reporting. So yes, is a straight answer to your question.
Great. Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, just a quick one. Really like to see the compliments in there. I think that's really good because it's good to get that balance between what we're doing well and we need to learn from that, as well as the things that might not be going so well. So thanks for including that in the report. I think in your opening remarks, Councillor O'Hagan, you mentioned that obviously which is understandable, that some of the complaints that take a bit longer to resolve are often in sort of planning or benefits, and it could be quite complicated cases. You also mentioned that there's work to sort of reduce them further and get them through the system more quickly. I just wondered if there was anything specific that you could point to that's happening to try and tackle those longer ones that, you know, sometimes sort of take a while to resolve, to see if we can get them done a bit quicker.
Well, there will be some work because the guidance has changed anyway. So there will be some work that has to be done to change our policies, as you see in the new policy, in response to that anyway. But if I don't know if Sally wants to come in on those specific complexities around planning in capita, not capita, the council tax, sorry, which will go through capita, which of course won't be.
Yeah, I think there are two elements here. One is making sure that teams are taking them seriously enough, quickly enough, and making sure that they consider those complaints early, not leave them to the deadline because they've got 10 or 15 days. They do it on, you know, day 13, and I think the new complaints module will help us with that. It has a workflow element which will make sure that things are moved on to people who have to resolve them more quickly. So, for instance, if there is information to go in from several different teams, it will manage that process so that the person responding will have all the information they need more quickly. I'm so sorry, I've forgotten what my second point was. Mark, are you going to help me out at all?
No, I think your first point was really, really good. The CRM workflow is really important because it will send automated messages to the complaint lead for any complaint. That will enable us to manage that system better. The other thing that Sally's team will do is badger people more frequently as well, to make sure that we do get complaints resolved quickly. There will always be, unfortunately, things that go over the deadline, but if they do, we agree with the complainant that extension, and it's not, then we don't leave them blind on it. We do talk to them and say, look, unfortunately, because of various issues, we need to extend the timeline for that response. And most people accept that because you're keeping them informed. If you don't, then it becomes more of an issue.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. What I like to do, just to make this part of the meeting manageable, we've got 4 recommendations, and what I like to do is I'll take some generic questions, and then what I'll do is go to each of those appendices to discuss a bit further, and then we'll vote on them, because each of those recommendations need to be voted separately. So is there any just generic questions about the reports? Councillor Roberts.
Yes, I'd be quite interested to see the information about how many stage 2 complaints go on to the Ombudsman, because I think that's often the stage where a particular organisation can become entrenched in, well, our view is right. And therefore, if they're all going on to the Ombudsman, we need to look at how we're handling stage 2 complaints. But I must admit, I couldn't really see that in here.
Who will
I'll ask the officers.
Is that you, Mark? Want to take this?
Yeah, we can certainly track that. Not all stage 2 ends up with the Ombudsman. A stage 2 process is very much head of service, for example, myself, reviewing what Sally's doing at stage 1 to make sure that she's addressed all of the complaint issues satisfactorily, that she's reached what I consider the right conclusion. Now, some of those end at that point. The complainant will think, okay, I've had my time asking the council to look at this issue. Very few of them end up at the Ombudsman, in my experience at the moment. And as the report says, when they did end up at the Ombudsman, none of them were upheld for either South or Vale this year. So the Ombudsman addresses that. They come to us and say, what have you done about this complaint? Show us your responses. We provide that to them. They make an assessment on that, an independent assessment of that. And as I say, none were upheld this year. But we can certainly track back over the last 2 or 3 years and look at which stage 2s ended up with the Ombudsman. It will take us a little bit of time to dig that information out, but I'm happy to provide it to members of the committee.
Okay, thank you. Any other generic questions, general questions? Okay, I see none. What I'll do is I'll go on to the recommendation A, and then we can discuss that and then vote on that afterwards, or decide to vote note the recommendation. So first recommendation is the formal complaints received in 23-24 and the council's performance in responding against timescales set out in our corporate complaints policy and procedure that's shown in Appendix 1. Is there any comments or questions on reports in Appendix 1? Anything you want to highlight, Sam or Mark?
No, I think we've
Okay, that's been discussed. So we'll start off with Vale. Are you happy to note that, or is there a proposal?
Yeah, proposed noting.
Noting, Councillor Porter, seconder. Councillor Roberts, all in favour? Okay, thank you. That's unanimous. South, I propose we note that report. Note point A. And it's second. All in favour? Thank you. Now I'll go on to recommendation B. The complaints received by the local government and social care ombudsman related to the councils in 23-24 as shown in Appendix 2. Are there any comments or questions on this part of the report? I see none. Is there anything you want to add, Sam?
Just that, you know, how good it is, I'm pleased I am that none of the ones that went on were upheld.
Okay, thank you very much. Start off with South this time. I propose that we note that recommendation. Seconded by Councillor Rawlings. All in favour? Thank you. That is noted. Over to Vale. Do I have a proposer?
Same again.
Okay, Councillor Porter and Smith to second. All in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous again. And then I'll go on to recommendation C. The council's self-assessments are required by the Housing Ombudsman Code, practice shown in Appendix 3. Again, any comments or questions? Like to add anything else, Sam?
No, I mean, obviously this will be ongoing in the future, so you know, we'll be coming back to this committee, so I'll be happy to make any comments on
Okay, thank you. Mark, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a procedural point that if you do agree this recommendation, we publish this on our websites, and we also have to submit it to the Housing Ombudsman because they require us to do that. But we will do that if you actually accept it.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I'll start with Vale. Do I have a proposal? You happy to note?
Yes.
Thank you. So Councillor Border, Councillor Smith is second. All in favour? Thank you. That's been passed unanimously. On to South. Councillor Morgan to oppose, to note.
Yeah.
Second, Councillor Dragonetti. All in favour? So that is noted and approved. So Mark, you will be putting that on our website and letting the Ombudsman know. Now on to a final recommendation, which is D, the revised corporate complaints policy and procedure assessed in Appendix 4. Again, is there any comments, Mike?
Yes, the acknowledgement time, you mentioned some things were being extended in terms of response times. For example, I think acknowledgement times are being extended from 1 to 5 days, or whatever. Could you just expand on that and explain it?
That's just in the guidance. So that's the guidance, and that's from government, from the Ombudsman, and that's why it's being incorporated into this policy. So it's national guidance, and we have to change it to that. What impact it will have, well, and it depends. Obviously, the primary acknowledgement means we've just got a few more days.
But if you kept in that you'd respond within 1 day, that's presumably still within 5 days.
Yes, that is correct. But considering that we also have a shortening of the longer period of time, it seemed fair and reasonable to incorporate that 5 days. It doesn't mean we can't do it within 1 day.
Right.
And I see Mark's got his hand up, and I've got Sally as well. So Mark, you can go first, and then Sally.
It's what Councillor Casey has just said there. The existing time is 1 day acknowledgement, 15 days to respond at stage 1, which is 16 days in total, if you like. This is just flipping it around. This is following the Ombudsman, both the Housing Ombudsman, the local government Ombudsman's codes of practice. And obviously the housing one is a statutory one, whereas the LGO one is discretionary. But for simplification, we have a complaints process which puts the same time frames for both.
Thank you. Sally, do you want to add anything else?
It was just the same point, to be honest. Yes, we've lifted it straight from the code of practice, so which we've done with everything we can where relevant. And just to reassure the councillor, really, that generally we acknowledge them within 1 or 2 days.
You'll be measuring them against 5, though, going forward, presumably.
That's what our policy says, but we will have our complaint system will enable us to know how long it was before we acknowledged it and how long it was before we responded to it. So we'll have that much deeper level of information. But our usual process, our policy says up to 5 days. Our process is 1 working day, or at the most 2.
So, if the committee would require a request to see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days, and that's perfectly reportable. The data will be there.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? I see none. So again, just on, I need a proposal from South in regards to note the report. Thank you, Councillor Dragonetti. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Morgan. All in favour? That is unanimous. Now over to Vale. Councillor Border. Seconder. Oh, for a minute I thought you were going to let someone else get it.
No,
Councillor, too slow. Councillor Smith. All in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous, and that's all of those individual points noted. So that makes it a little bit easier for you, Mark. And thank you, Councillor Ray, for bringing the report and for showing us the performance that we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you to the officers for their good performance.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards, I see you've got your hand up.
I just wanted to say, as the cabinet member for Vale, I wanted to hugely say thank you so much to Sally and the team for the report, and to sincerely apologise to the committee for being so late. My child's parents' evening ran over, so I'm embarrassingly late. And thank you, Sam, for holding the fort as well. But just to I guess say to the committee and to both Mark and Sally, Sam and I did discuss this pre-committee, and we're very aligned in our thinking towards the report. So I just wanted to have that noted. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Edwards, and I hope the school report went well. Thank you very much. We'll now go on to item 9, is the Treasury Management Outturn report for 23-24. So I'll hand over to our Head of Finance, Simon.
Thank you. So this is the third and final report this committee will receive in respect of the 2023-24 financial year's Treasury management activity. This outturn report will be considered by each council's respective cabinet and council meetings later this month. In terms of performance, the key headline is that both councils exceeded budgeted treasury investment income in 2023-24. This is shown in the tables at paragraph 16 on page 71, with further detail provided in the appendices. The council also stayed within prudential indicators and counterparty limits during the financial year. The committee is asked separately for each council to note the report, to consider whether it is satisfied that the Treasury activity has been carried out in accordance with the Treasury management strategy, and to make any comments or recommendations to cabinets as necessary. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Rawlings.
Yeah, I thought we had asked previously that we note in here the rate of inflation that was applicable in the relevant time. So if we were looking at page 71, the table there, under 5, the rate of return, I would like to see just a note on a line of what the rate of inflation was. CPI, whatever we choose, is a reasonable thing, and then a rate of return, a real rate of return above inflation, if you like. It just reminds everybody that about the purchasing value of the money that we're putting away. I know some of it's only owed in nominal terms, and I know some of it's money that we need to actually use in spending power, but I think it's a useful piece of background. In terms of, well, the forecast that we've got in here, I think, was linked as at May 24, to be fair, so it's not immediately current, but I would just comment that for a long time we seem to have seen forecasts that have been overly strong on the fall of interest rates, and you know, I don't know what the current forecast is showing from them, but I still think but I think they're likely to be going too low, and I think it's very interesting to look at the difference between the bank rate forecast and the 50-year forecast, and I think there's something going on there. The 50 years probably got a better view of the world. And one other point, which is the maturity structure of investments. I just thought, looking at this, it would be kind of helpful if last year's was there as a reference point, so that we could see the shape of what it was and then what it previously and what it is for this year, so that we can just have a sense of how that looks. I had a question on page 78, in that it says in the para 6 bullet point 3, the fund's unit price fell by 3.9% as a result of subdued market. And I think somewhere there it says it's reflected above. But it just didn't quite seem to flow with what was actually above. That was all.
Okay, so I'll take them in reverse order.
Okay.
That one I'll have to take away because I don't have the information in front of me. So
Understood.
Myself and Anna will take that question away. The having last year's figures in, yes, we can look at that, and we'll also you have made the point about rate of inflation before. I apologise. We'll pick that up going forward. I think just in terms of the interest rate forecast, I mean, I've read today, I think wage inflation's come out at a level that I think is implying that we might get a rate drop to 4.75 in November. Time will tell. I'm not convinced. I think I spend a lot of my time at the moment talking about interest rates staying higher for longer.
I
And
think that's-
I'm not convinced I'll be saying anything different for very long.
I think that's right. We've got a Bank of England governor saying they might have to come down a bit more enthusiastically. We've got other people saying that borrowing by the government's going to potentially put things up. We've got a lot of noise and confusion going on. I'm not seeing any dramatic movement in one direction anytime soon.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Rawlings. Any other comments, questions? I see none. Okay, the recommendations obviously are outlined in page 69. I'll just quickly read them so everyone's aware. The recommendations are that Joint Audit and Governance Committee, A, notes the Treasury Management Act Return Report for 23-24. B, considers whether it's satisfied that Treasury activities are carried out in accordance with the Treasury Management Strategy and the policy. And C, make any comments and recommendations to Cabinet as necessary. So we'll start off again. This is going to be a council specific vote. I'm going to recommend for South that we note the recommendations as on page 69. Well, seconder. Thank you, Councillor Dragonetti. All in favour?
Yeah, hopefully we can deal with those report points. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So that's unanimous.
By the way, Simon, sorry, I meant to say para 11, page 79. It wasn't the other one, no, the other reference. I think
Thank you, Councillor Rawlings. On to fail. Do I have a proposal?
Julie, your amendment.
Okay, I propose the recommendations.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Forder. All in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. So I think that's all done. Now on to item 10, which is the 2023-24 Annual Joint Audit and Governance Report, and that's on pages 19 to 96. And on this one, I shall be introducing the report, and I should be speaking on this agenda item. Some of you are probably thinking that you haven't seen this report before, and that's because you haven't. It's the first time that this committee has actually audited the what we do and created the annual report. And I'm a real big advocate of best practice, and the completion of this annual report was on the recommendation of our external advisor who we engaged with when we had the training session. And also it's a recommendation by the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, which is CIPA. And within their position statement, it says if you do this, it complies with their position statement, and that's what an audit committee should be doing. Emily and I, who are the co-chairs, we looked at the final version, and we will be presenting this to full council and providing on what the committee said in terms of their feedback. So what you're asked to do is to review the draft report, give us any comments or amendments, and then we'll create a report that will go to full council. The reports are attached to Appendix 1, which is on pages 93 to 96. And just to give you a quick highlight of what they are, we've shown the agenda items for the committee meetings that we held in 23 to 24. And we've also included the meeting on the 15th of April 2024, as a lot of the things that we discussed was actually relevant for that particular year, for that financial year. We've also undertaken the work, the committee signing off the financial statements. We looked at the receiving the reports of the work undertaken by the council auditors, EY. And the other thing that we'll also be doing is, like we've just done, is look at the Treasury Management reports, and again, it's been received by and shown to the committee. The other thing that we've done is all the papers on internal audits activity during the year have again been discussed and debated by this committee as well. And we've also had papers on governance and risk management. Again, this committee has reviewed that. We looked at code of conduct, complaints, and the regulation of investigatory powers. So this report also shows the training that we've provided to the committee during the year. And it also, we've had a bit of a discussion in terms of what have we achieved as a committee. And again, that is highlighted on that report. So this is really going to be presented to the full council to say what this committee has done and also to fit in with best practice. So I'm happy to take any comments or questions. Councillor Rawlings and then Councillor Ford.
A couple of observations
Yes.
I had were related to Treasury Management. I don't know if this is appropriate, but I think we have asked for a review of Treasury strategy, and hopefully we'll see that coming forward in January. And the ESG review that we have just done. I think it's reasonable to mention that those are things that we asked to look at and are underway.
That's a great point. We'll put it in for next year. so it's good to be prepared. So this is for 23. So yes, so we'll
Understood.
put that in for next year.
Understood.
So, but that's a very good point. Councillor Ford.
First, I'd like to thank Councillor Khan, you and Councillor Smith for an excellent report and for doing the work. And I've had very few comments on the report, which makes it sort of rather strange that I'm going to see an excellent sense, because obviously I think if this report, we do this report, it's very important it's an inclusive report, and not only you as joint chairs own it, but actually all members of the committee own it as well. And so I would suggest next year, I would suggest a process whereby a draft of this comes out outside the formal committee structure, sort of prior to that, so that we can actually make some comments before it comes to committee, if that's all right. And I think that will give us all a bit more time to think about it and actually make sure we feel real ownership of it.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Ford. I think that's a very good idea, and more than happy for that to happen in the next cycle. Councillor Roberts.
I was just going to ask about fraud investigation, because it isn't on our current annual list of things that we've looked into. But I'm assuming that there must be some element of fraud that occurs during the year. I remember that when we were in charge of parking and it was in-house, there were fraud investigations in that area. I'm thinking about revs and bends, whether that generates any fraud investigations. I'm a bit surprised that there's we don't have that function here. So I'm waiting for the officers to respond.
Okay. So a couple of points. I mean, internal audit considers the risk of fraud in all of its internal audit work. So, you know, every audit that's come through here has had the risk of fraud in that area assessed and reviewed as part of that audit. In terms of benefit fraud, we do have a separate team under the Revs and Bends manager that looks after counter fraud. I mean, the way that work would be reported here would be through an audit of that team's activity. I mean, that's obviously day-to-day work for them. So it's not the outputs of their work, I suppose, isn't reported here per se. It never has been, but it would be reflected on and you know, it is subject to external audit, subject to internal audit periodically, and obviously the findings of that report would come here, you know, as part of the normal reporting of internal audits.
So you're basically saying there isn't sufficient fraud of the council to warrant separate investigations.
I mean, one comment I would make, I mean, as part of the external audit process every year, we have to report to the external auditor instances of frauds that have been reported to senior management, and by that I mean either the head of internal audit, myself, or the monitoring officer. And certainly for the year in question, we have not reported any instances of fraud we've got it to Bishop Fleming in this case, but we are not reporting any instances of fraud because we aren't aware of any.
And also when Victoria comes and presents, we can raise that question again.
I did a bit of comparison looking at Epping, Forest and fraud prevention, and they've got about 13 different potential types of fraud, and 6 of those don't appear on. I looked at the Vale one, don't appear. So it looks like there are other areas to be considering, and stating the bleeding obvious, fraud is an act of deception. So the fact that nobody has actually spotted any doesn't mean there isn't any there. So I do wonder if it's something that needs to be addressed with a review of some sort.
I totally agree, but the fact that you raised it, we will put it onto the work schedule and we'll liaise with Victoria in regards to that. Thank you for that, Mike. Any other comments or questions? Again, I see none. So this is really for us to I'll read out the report recommendation. Joint Audit Governance Committee is recommended to review the draft report attached in Appendix 1, which outlines the committee's activity during 2023-24. Agree any amendments and finalise in preparation for presentation to council meetings by the respective chairs of Joint Audit Governance Committee. So again, this is going to be council specific because obviously we're going to be presenting it to each of our councils, which are next week. So I'll start off with South. In fact, I'll present this. I'll probably won't propose this. So who can?
I'll propose it.
Thank you, Tony, Councillor Morgan, and Councillor Dragonetti seconding. That we're just happy for me to go with that report. Okay, all in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. So I will present that next week. Now over to the Vale councillors. Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Roberts, can I have a seconder?
I'm second. What am I seconding? No, don't worry.
Councillor Fuller, thank you. All in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. So that is going to be presented by Councillor Smith next week as well. But we'll now go on to item 11, which is the work programme, which is on pages 97 to 103. I can ask Becky to introduce this.
Yes, so it's to note the work programme. Something to flag is obviously we've had that additional meeting on the 25th of November added. So we've got items on there such as review of the corporate risk review, internal audit update, review of the Joint Audit and Governance Committee's terms of reference. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you for that. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, so I've got a few on the work programme. So the review of the partnership, the paper that was due to come here previously was withdrawn. Have we had any more certainty around whether this is going to be ready for the 25th of November?
I mean, the only comment I'd make is obviously that paper is dependent on proposals for the way the pop's going being presented. So
Yeah.
if they are not presented, that paper won't come. So because there's nothing to bring. So that that almost needs an asterisk against it that says subject to proposals on the future being available to comment on.
When will we know that though, whether it's coming or not?
I mean, basically, I can take that away and ask officers. I mean, Suzanne herself is on holiday at the moment, so we can pick that up when she's back from leave, and we should have more of an idea early next month.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Porter and then Mike.
I'm going to ask a question which is pretty stupid, but I've had a long day, I know I've raised the issue of our housing programme and the ownership of housing and the issues about it, and I can't remember whether we said we were going to put it on this work programme or on scrutiny work programme. Well, if it's on, should be on it. If we said it was going to be on this work programme, it isn't. So that's the point.
Yeah.
Depending on what you want to raise, it could be either. If you're actually talking about, I suppose, why we're holding them, what we're out of them, what usage has been so far, what difference has it made, those sorts of questions would be scrutiny questions. I suppose how is the housing functioning in terms of its processes and procedures, then that would be more likely to come here, but that would be more likely to be an audit. And I think I've got to finish on the audit plan for audit, internal audit to look at. So depending on what you want it to look at, depends on which committee it will come to. But it might be on, even regardless of that, it might be on the internal audit plan anyway as an area to review.
I can quite understand why there would be questions about what's the reason for it.
Yeah.
But the one that I'm particularly interested in, and I think from what you're saying, it falls between the two stalls, is how are we managing it?
Yeah.
What are the risks and how are we managing the risks? Do we understand the risks? Have we got the competence inside the organisation to manage this new programme, things like that.
Can, I'll go to Councillor Smith, but we'll come back to that just in terms of what the officers can look at when it comes to this committee, but we'll make sure it's on that list.
Yeah, it's actually on that point. So I did have a chat with Councillor Foxall, who chairs bail scrutiny, about it in terms of the bail getting on staff, but to see what she was proposing, and there was a kind of an idea of writing exactly down what you were just saying, Simon. So setting out exactly what we wanted to know, and through that discussion, it did feel a bit more like scrutiny. But I also agree with what you've just saying there. It needs to be on the audit plan coming forward, because it kind of felt like most of the questions that we were just kind of coming up with so far seem to lean a bit more towards scrutiny, but I don't know exactly how far that got and whether it's on the scrutiny work programme.
My tired memory has now recalled all of this actually, but my own view is that it falls between the two stalls, and it may well be something that needs to be looked at by both committees.
Yeah, I think it does need to be on the work programme for here. I suppose it would be about the timing and exactly what we're looking at. Isn't it?
I think the question for me is whether if it's on the internal audit plan, then I think it's already on the work plan effectively, because obviously it will come here as an audit. I think I'd probably want to have a conversation with Victoria. If it's not on the audit plan, I think something to consider. I don't think of it itself it's necessarily a separate report if it's being considered by audit, but we'll take that away and ponder as officers.
That's why I'd like to come back to it, but it's been noted, so we'll come back to you with an answer. Mike?
No, there wasn't anything for me. Okay, waving.
Councillor Roberts.
I'm quite interested as to the amount of income it generates, the amount of money that it takes to run the system, as well as all the other things, because it's laughingly thought, well, running housing makes you a profit, makes you an income. Those of us who do it are more aware of all the downsides and all the difficulties, and how quite often when you actually draw the line that says total, it's not always even positive, depending on what happened to your property and etc., and flooding and all the other risks. So I think that, and that definitely would be A&G, I think, wouldn't it?
I think that's actually more scrutiny, to be fair, because I think that's almost about the business case for holding them, and because as much as there's the cost of running them, and then there's the cost avoidance of running them. The cost of putting alternative accommodation for housing and better outcomes. So that's more of a scrutiny discussion. I think the audit and governance point would be, what are our procedures for making sure the houses are safe? That comes under the health and safety remit, for example. What are our procedures to make sure we take the money, collect the money, before, one level of scrutiny we're looking at, what's the business case look like? Well, the audit governance committee is how do we make sure we get the money? That would be my take. What are our cash collection processes? Are we making sure that, what are we doing with arrears? What are we doing to make sure the houses are safe, that all the checks are done, all the due diligence on actually buying the properties, where we're buying the properties. So I think that for me is the difference. I think a lot of what you just described actually probably sits in scrutiny, but there's still a role for this committee.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I just have two separate points on the work programme that have come up this evening. So one of them was the annual report. I think we both feel that that's a really good idea that Councillor Border mentioned earlier about getting a bit more input from obviously this is the first one we've done. So yeah, we're learning. So that's a really good idea. I think we need to make sure it's on the work programme so we don't forget. So just having a think about at what stage we need to make sure that report is first draft circulated and everything, to make sure that we leave enough time for that, I suppose. And then the other thing was just the conversation about fraud that was mentioned earlier as well, and just if there's, again, it might be a chat with Victoria just to make sure that what we've got coming through in terms of what's already in the audit plans, and it does that cover in. So I suppose that's just a conversation to take offline to make sure that we've got that in, and if there is anything that we want to bring separately as a separate report, and put it on the work programme at a later point.
Yeah, if you can just update us by email after you've had that discussion, Victoria. Yeah, Will do.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Any other comments, questions?
Just on the internal report, actually bringing, if it's possible, bringing it to the first committee of the next political year, as it were, might be helpful, especially because sometimes committee members do change. Although I recognise I've spotted the same faces here for quite a long time now, but sometimes they do change, and actually the new committee being able to look at that right off might be helpful.
We can't find anyone else who wants to join, Tony, that's a problem.
I don't realise how exciting it is.
That's it. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay, I see none. So this work programme is for noting.
I'm sorry,
Oh, sorry.
I've got one
I see
area
that.
which I'm not sure we've looked at, which is how well the councils adhere to the governance rules and the constitutional rules that are set down.
I think that's in part where the annual governance
Yeah.
statement comes in, as part of the statement of accounts.
So that comes in under the external orders.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we do that. Yeah, well, we have to. I see no more comments or questions. Okay, this is for noting, so I'm happy to propose that we note the work schedule with the additions for future. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Smith. All in favour? Thank you very much. At 5 to 8, I close the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wasn't 30 minutes.
I tried.
I think to be fair, Mocky, there wasn't quite.
Thank you, everyone.
Susie.